Hi, this is Jamie Franklin, curator here at the Bennington Museum. Welcome to another tour at 10. Today I am standing once again in Robert Frost at Pleasanton, Vermont. And we're here towards the back of the exhibition. And I thought I would talk about two kind of iconic kind of institutions here in Bennington that Robert Frost was kind of connected to in various ways during his time living here in Bennington County between 1920 and 1938. So the first of these is his ties to Bennington College. So here we have a photograph by Clara Saprell of Bennington College from about 1937. And actually, Saprell moved to Bennington from Buffalo. She had had a previous relationship with Vermont starting around 1917, but it was in 1937 that she moved full-time to Manchester, Vermont, really at the urging of Robert Frost and Walter Hart, who was another writer who was in Frost's circle of literary friends here in Bennington County. So Bennington College was in its infancy and planning stages in the mid-1920s, late 1920s, before it opened to students in 1932. And Frost, though he had never graduated from an institution of higher learning, he had attended both Harvard and Dartmouth but didn't get degrees. By the mid to late 1920s, he had a pretty significant resume as an educator and teacher. He taught at a number of secondary schools in New Hampshire before he moved to Vermont, and began teaching at colleges in 1917 when he began on the faculty at Amherst College down in the Pioneer Valley. And he taught on and off again at Amherst into the 1920s. After he moved to South Shaftesbury in 1920, in 1921 he began as poet in residence at Michigan University. And so for about 4 months out of the year, Frost lived on campus there in Ann Arbor. He didn't have any teaching responsibilities, but he gave talks, he engaged with students, faculty, and so he really had a well-rounded background and experience in higher education. So it comes as no surprise that some of the early founders of Bennington College sought him out since he was living only 2 miles away from where Bennington College ended up being situated, there in Old Bennington, right next to South Shaftesbury. And so we have a number of objects in here that help to kind of tell the story of Frost's relationship to Bennington College. He was asked by Mrs. McCullough, or Edith Van Bethhuizen McCullough, part of the Park McCullough family, married to Hall Park McCullough, but it was really Edith who was one of the prime founders of Bennington College. And we have a wonderful postcard here that was written by Robert Frost to Mrs. McCullough, in which he says, "You know how anxious I am for the success of Bennington College." And so Frost lent his name as one of the sponsors of Bennington College when they were first trying to sell the idea of Bennington College in the late 1920s. Here we see an early Bennington College prospectus, which was produced in 1928. And that was what that postcard was referring to, was him allowing his name to be used as a sponsor. He was also supposed to be one of the speakers at the groundbreaking ceremony for Bennington College. And here we have a program for that ceremony. It turned out that he had an illness in the family and wasn't able to make it. But he continued to have close relationships to the college, to the McCulloughs over the years, came back and gave talks at the college as late as the 1950s, well after he had moved away from Bennington County. And then another one of the stories that we tell back here is his relationship to the old First Church, or the First Congregational Church, which is, of course, just a stone's throw behind us here as we are at the Bennington Museum. And in the 1930s, the Old First Church, which has been built in 1804, 1805, opened to its first congregants in 1806, had become one of the iconic early religious buildings really in all of New England. But in the post-Civil War years, it had suffered a less than ideal kind of renovation. They had added regular pews and replacing the original box pews. They had taken out a beautiful Palladian window and replaced it with Victorian stained glass. And so in the 1930s, the minister there at Old First Church at the time, Vincent Raby Booth, who was also one of the early founders of Bennington College, so these two stories kind of connect in a way, was able to get the church and the surrounding cemetery named as one of the colonial shrines of Vermont, and was able to raise funds to conserve the interior of the Old First Church and bring it back to its original glory. And so these are photographs, again, by Clarissa Prell, really one of the leading pictorialist photographers in America at the time, showing, here we see the choir of the Old First Church after restoration, and here we see a beautiful view down the aisle, looking at the restored box pews, the restored high pulpit, and the Palladian window, which replaced the poor earlier replacement of stained glass. And Frost not only again provided his name in support of the restoration of the Old First Church, he was also a speaker at the ceremony and the dedication of the newly restored church in the summer of 1937. And here we have the program to that dedication ceremony, open to Robert Frost's Black Cottage, which is the poem that he read there at the dedication. So again, this exhibition is really about telling stories about Frost's relationship to Bennington, Shaftesbury, and the surrounding community and its various people, landscapes, and institutions. And so these are two of the kind of institutional ties that Frost had while he was living and working here in Bennington. And so I'll see you at another tour at 10 in the near future. Thanks for joining us today.